Well, it was in the winter of 1970. I was living in New York City on the Lower East Side on Avenue B, right by Tompkins Square Park. Which is where the Hare Krishna movement got started in the United States with was a Bhaktivedanta, and he started chanting the Hare Krishna mantra, and Allen Ginsberg lived up the street. And quite a crowd would, used to gather there to chant. And I started doing Hatha Yoga with Swami Satchidananda. And at some point I got this pull to go to India that I couldn't explain. It was just a tremendous pull, and I had been reading the autobiography, or rather the biography of Ramakrishna, and felt very inspired by that. And I ended up actually in India with Ram Dass and Neem Karoli Baba. And that was the whole Sangha there with Krishna Das and Surya Das, all the Dases. And anyway, it was a beautiful, beautiful experience, and there were many Indian saints, some of who you're very familiar with, and Anandamayi Ma, so on, that I met. But none of them seemed to be really my teacher. In fact, Neem Karoli Baba seemed to go out of his way to ignore me. And of course, I learned later, when the guru does that, you're actually getting special attention, even though you might not realize at the time. And it took me about 40 years to realize actually who he was and the blessing that I got. But I left India feeling that I hadn't really found what I was looking for. The emphasis was very much on leaving the body, that life is an illusion, that this is all Maya on the earth plane, that you shouldn't have desires or wants or ego, that once you achieved a level of oneness with the Absolute, then you could leave your body and return to the source, and you would be like a grain of salt dissolving in the ocean, and you would lose all individuality. So I left India pretty much feeling that the work was just to meditate as much as possible and stay in that oneness all the time. And I wandered around America, drove across the country, and then ended up staying with Jai Uttal, actually, who I'd been with Neem Karoli Baba in Berkeley. And I was living on his floor, and one morning I was meditating, and this ball of light came down into the room, and this voice spoke to me from the ball of light, said, "Go to Muir Woods." And so I got in my car. This was still early in the morning, like maybe 8 o'clock. Drove across the Golden Gate to Muir Woods, and it was pouring rain. And I was the only car in the lot. And so I walked up the path and found a tree up on the side of the hill that was hollow. so I could get out of the rain. And I was sitting inside this tree meditating, and I was intending to leave my body, like this yogi that I lived with in the Himalayas was getting ready to leave his body. And I thought, that sounded like a good thing. There's nothing more here on the earth plane that I want to do, and it's all an illusion anyway, that any desire is just ego. So why not leave my body and go back into the world of oneness and bliss, you know? So I said, but before I do this, I should really ask permission. And I hadn't really consciously had contact with any of these masters or higher beings. But you know, in fact, a friend of mine that I met in India said, well, there's this group called the Great White Brotherhood that's guiding the destiny of humanity. They're beings that were human at one time and who are now enlightened ascended beings working from their higher bodies, and they're guiding the destiny of mankind. And I said, well, they're not doing a very good job of it, are they? And because the world seemed like sort of a mess, but he had said Mt Shasta was one of their focal points. And he had told me that I should go to Mt Shasta. In fact, in a period of about a week, 3 different people in India said, you should go to Mt Shasta. But I thought, why should I? And I don't have any reason to go there. It's leaving my body sounds much more exciting, you know. So I sat in this hollow redwood tree, and I was doing this Vipassana with my eyes open, just observing the in-breath and the out-breath. And it was very peaceful, the rain falling in the redwood forest, and there was nobody around. And I said, if anybody up there hears me, please answer this prayer. Show me if there's some reason to stay in a body. And I named every high being I could think of: Jesus, Mary, Buddha, Kuan Yin. I did name Saint Germain, and then a few other masters that I'd heard of. And then I said, you know, if there is a reason, please answer this prayer. And suddenly, I saw these 2 feet appear in front of me, just 2 tennis shoes. And I looked up, and it's not like if someone had been walking toward me, I would have heard twigs cracking and stuff like that. It's just 1 minute, there was nobody there, and then suddenly there was somebody there in front of me. And he knew my name. He was a young man, you know, about my own age, you know, late 20s. And he said, well, it was interesting. He was wearing a suede jacket, blue jeans, a suede jacket, but the jacket was not wet, even though it was raining, you know. He was perfectly dry. And he said, Peter, I am the part of the Godhead that has been sent to answer your prayer. And he said, you can leave the earth now if you wish. You've finished sufficient of your karma to leave the earth. But before you give me, and I can facilitate that, but before you give me your answer, I want to show you something. And then he touched me on the third eye, and touched me here, and the next thing I knew, I was standing outside my body. My physical form was still sitting in the tree, and I was in this slightly more etheric form. And he put his arm around me, and the next thing I know, we were leaving the earth, and we went to this very blissful realm, and the beings there were spherical. They were just like giant pearls, like of light, like large bowling ball, emanating this beautiful opalescence with rainbow colors coming out of it. And the feeling was just blissful. And he indicated that these were the permanent selves of human beings, or what in India they would call the Atman, or the permanent atom of the individual self, or the higher self, whatever you want to call it. The monad is another term for it. And that these were beings that had finished their earth evolution and were in sort of a state of extended samadhi or bliss. And he said, you can stay here if you want. And I thought, boy, it's so beautiful here, and you could just feel the peace and the bliss. And then I started to hear this crying coming from someplace, and it got louder and louder. And I thought, where is that coming from? And I looked down, and beneath my feet, I could see the earth. It was just this little blue ball. And the suffering, it was more than just the sound. You could feel the suffering of humanity. And he said, this is what the masters hear all the time. And I just felt such anguish and desire to help. I said, I want to go back and help. And this guy smiled and said, you made the right choice. He said, now we'll be working closely together. So the next thing I knew, I was back in my body in Muir Woods, and there's this young guy standing in front of me. And he said, go to Mt Shasta. The first person you meet there will tell you what to do next. And then he said, now I will show you who I am. So he took a few steps back, and right in front of me, he turned from this guy that appeared to be a hiker in jeans and tennis shoes and a suede jacket into this master wearing a long white robe. And his face was very familiar, and I realized that while I was a guest at the Theosophical Society in Adyar, I had opened up Unveiled Mysteries and had seen this picture, and he was the master in there, that this was the Master Saint Germain. But I recognized the picture, that it was familiar, but it didn't totally flash, oh, this is Saint Germain. But then he just disappeared completely, like Obi-Wan Kenobi, So I felt that I'd been energized like by a bolt of lightning. And I went to my car, and it was my old Dodge van, got in, and there was still nobody in the parking lot. And it was still early in the morning. And actually I have no recollection of the drive from there until I got to about Reading. And so I, found myself driving into Mt Shasta. It was quite a different town then, and now there were signs up that said, no long hairs now, we do not solicit hippie patronage, things like that. So, I went into the local breakfast place, and it was like a scene from Easy Rider. All the loggers there stared at me. What are you doing here? Can't you read the sign? No long hairs, and so on. Well, when the waitress served me, then everybody relaxed. And a young guy who had been in the back came up to me and said, you're supposed to see this lady by the name of Pearl. And I thought, well, I don't know who she is, but I was told that the first person that I talked to would tell me what to do next. So he said, come over to the health food store. He owned the local health food store. So I went over and I used the phone. He dialed Pearl's number, and she said, come right up. And I thought, boy, that's pretty good, get an appointment right away. So I went up to see Pearl, and she lived in this sort of gingerbread type house at the end of the street. A dead-end street.
This is the house in Mt Shasta, California, where Pearl Doris lived in the 1970s. A constant stream of spiritual seekers made their way to her doorway to sit in the presence of this godly woman.
And I knocked on the door, and it opened, and there was this sweet little grandmotherly lady that sort of resembled Yoda. And I thought, I wonder what I'm doing with this woman. She said, come in, I've been expecting you. And I said, how could you be expecting me? And she said, the Master Saint Germain came to me this morning and said that he was sending someone to see me. Well, what I didn't realize was that Pearl had been an assistant to Godfrey Ray King, who wrote Unveiled Mysteries, The Magic Presence, and the I Am Discourses. and that she had been his personal assistant and had been appointed by Saint Germain to be the head of the San Francisco I Am Sanctuary. And after she had attended the funeral for Godfrey, where he made the etheric ascension, not the physical ascension, his physical body died, which was a great shock to the I Am students, who had been told that none of those students would know death, you know. And but she saw him, her inner sight was very open, and she saw him being raised into a higher dimension by the masters. And after that, she was told by Saint Germain to withdraw. And this caused quite a bit of turmoil, because she was one of the head people in the San Francisco sanctuary, and a number of other people withdrew at the same time. And for a long time, a small group gathered in Santa Rosa and did their own services, where they experienced the Ascended Masters coming to them. And at some point, she was brought together with the man who was to be her husband, Jerry Doris, who was another I Am student. And they were sent to Mount Shasta, and for a long time they just lived an ordinary life, managed motels in the area, and farms and things like that. And I think for about 20 years, they had just led a very, very quiet life. Even their neighbors didn't really know who they were, and they didn't talk about that activity. And then one day, people just started showing up at her door. There was no internet then, no flyers, no advertising. A couple of guys met her at a party. A friend of Pearl's had thrown a birthday party for her, and they could feel her energy. Even though she didn't talk about anything so-called spiritual, they said, this lady knows something. They could feel this tremendous, not just love, but tremendous power that she had. And they followed her home, a respectful distance. She didn't know she was being followed. So she got home, and then a few minutes later, there was a knock at the door, and she said, what are you doing here? And they said, we know that you know something, and you know what's going on inside the mountain, and we want to know what you know. And she said, well, she said, my hubby is not here right now. I'm not sure I should let you in, but, you know, just stay a short time, and you have to be gone by the time he comes back from work. So they stayed about 15 minutes and left. And the next night they came back with some friends. And then a few days later, some people from San Francisco showed up, and then they came back the following weekend with a couple of carloads of people. And this was now in '73, and every day more and more people started coming. But a lot of these people were telling Pearl that you should follow the Eastern path, that this is all an illusion. What you should do is close your eyes, meditate, leave your body, and that you should Om a lot. That was the big thing back then, where circles, where everyone would sit around and Om. And so many people were telling Pearl like this. Pearl was asking Saint Germain, should I give up this path and follow the Eastern path? And this morning that I showed up, Saint Germain had come to her and said, today, Pearl, you will have your answer. And as I was sitting there, she said, you've been brought here by the Ascended Master Saint Germain. And she said, I think it would be appropriate if we meditated. So the way I was trained to meditate was you sit on the floor in lotus position, close your eyes, and focus on the higher worlds completely. I would lose consciousness completely of the physical world. And she said, as she saw me start to slide off the chair, she said, you don't have to sit on the floor to meditate. And I said, really? This is the strangest thing I'd ever heard, you know? She said, in fact, you don't need to close your eyes. And I said, you gotta be kidding, you know? And then she started looking at me. We made this eye contact, and she wasn't staring or anything. She said, just turn your attention inward. Gaze inward at your heart, and feel the presence. So when I say, who are you? Why does everyone go here? People don't go here or there. Everyone instinctively feels that the center of their being is here. So put your attention on that and meditate on that and say, I am the living light. I am divine love. I am the presence of God in action. And she had this ability that I had never experienced before to actually transmit the feeling of that. So as we had our eyes open and were aware of each other, she became this being of light. And I felt my own heart just expanding and this tremendous energy going through me. And the two of us just became luminous, like we were in this bubble of light, and the whole room lit up, you know? And then she said, now say, I am the living light. I said it silently. When I said that, I saw the light, like someone turned a light switch on in the room. And I said, at last I have seen the light. You hear the people say, have you seen the light? Well, I always thought that was a metaphorical expression, you know? Like, have you seen the truth? But there was an actual light that you could see. And I got really excited, and I said, this is what I've been looking for. I went to India to find this, and no teacher in India taught me this, and now I see the truth of the light, and that you can call it forth by your own words and by your attention on the center of your being. And she said, well, thank you. I was so excited. I said, thank you so much for sharing this with me. And she said, well, thank you also, because now I have my answer, that what I'm doing is right. You said you've been to India, you've experienced these Eastern teachings, and you're telling me that you didn't get from them what you're getting from this. And actually, this teaching really is a part of the ancient Eastern teachings also, but it's been lost. And what Saint Germain is doing now is taking these ancient teachings from India and Tibet and China and releasing them in a very simple modern form that anybody can apply. You don't need to learn Sanskrit or Tibetan or whatever it is. That the essence of it is really very simple. And the door into mastery really is in the center of your chest, and you put your attention there, that door opens into the world of infinite light and overwhelming love. And over the years, I used to go up in the morning before I went to work and sit with her, and even 5 minutes of sitting in that, where we look into each other's eyes and open our hearts and release that light, would set me up for the whole day. And it was not an emotional kind of love, it was the divine love, where you would feel the God presence within you coming forth to bless the other person. In fact, the affirmation was really, I am the presence of God blessing you, and she would be saying the same thing. She was the presence of God blessing me. So as you give, you receive. That was the big lesson. And what was beautiful was that she said, you don't need to leave the world. You can be in the world, you can enjoy life, and that is where you actually learn mastery. You don't learn to be a master of the world in a cave. You only can learn that in daily life. And I started having dreams where these masters in white robes would come to me and start telling me, we want you to get into real estate. And I thought they meant the real estate, which is God, you know. But they actually meant real estate, and that as I became a business person and got grounded actually and became a part of my community, that's when I started really getting the lessons about how to be in the world, how to be a real person. In the Jewish community, they have an expression, to be a real mensch, you know? It's not to be some space case, it's to be really present in life, to be a real person, someone that other people can depend on, that you keep your word, that you don't get angry at people over trivial things, and that you learn to be a blessing to those who know you, and that you can be a being of light who affects the entire earth in a positive way, that it doesn't matter where you are on the earth, that you can send that light out anywhere. And as Pearl said, there is no space between thoughts. So you can affect people in Russia or Syria or China or any part of the world, even any part of the universe. Because really the whole universe exists within yourself. And as you're conscious, your thoughts go out and affect everyone and everything. So that's a little bit of what I learned from Pearl. And over the years, I really saw her work miracles. She could put these teachings into practice. And when people really were in trouble, they would call her, and she would turn her attention inward, do an affirmation, and miracles would happen. Well, Pearl and Jerry had moved to Wairika, and a young fellow was living with them to help them out. And they had a camper. It was a pickup truck with a big camper on the back of it, and they didn't use it very often. And they needed to move it. Bill was going to live in it, and they couldn't get it started. So Pearl and Jerry, Pearl's husband, were trying to move this thing out. So Bill and Jerry got into the truck to move it out of the driveway. And they couldn't get it started because it hadn't been started in a number of months. And so the ignition wouldn't turn over, and Pearl saw they were having a problem and came out and said, "What's the problem?" And Jerry said, "It won't start. I think the battery's dead." And Pearl said, "Just a minute." And she stood in front of the truck, put her hands on the hood, closed her eyes for a minute, and said, "Try it now." Jerry turned the key and it started right up. And Jerry turned to Bill, sitting next to him, and said, "You know, she's got quite a bit of power." It's like, you know, for an old gal, she can really put it out there or something. It was really cute. And Bill laughed after that. So every now and then she'd do something like that. Another time, some people were trying to move some furniture and they couldn't it was a huge desk. They couldn't get it through the door jamb. And they tried turning it every direction. They couldn't get it through. Pearl said, "Just a minute." She made the call to her God self, and then it went right through, and they couldn't figure out how that had happened. So, you know, there were many, many times where I saw her work physical miracles. Another time, a woman was giving birth, and Pearl heard that she was in danger of passing on, and she went down to the hospital and actually walked into the delivery room, put her hands on the woman, and suddenly she came back into her body and was perfectly healthy after that. And it didn't matter the distance. She could work miracles really at any distance because, as she said, there's no space between thoughts. But she conveyed really the reality of the God presence that each of us is. Well, I saw Pearl work many miracles. Healings, she could make things happen. If people wanted something, a job, whatever it was, they would call her and she would turn her attention within, do the affirmations, and things would happen. Of course, the greatest miracle was how she could transmit this consciousness to other people. People would feel it. And that is because she was in touch with her own I am presence. And a lot of people think that's just a metaphor, like the higher self, the lower self, so on. But this is the permanent Atman that I saw when I was in Muir Woods, when I was raised off the earth. And I saw that this is the true self of every person, that the physical body is the illusory self, and we think this is the real self. But actually, she was in touch with that true self, and because of that connection, she could call that consciousness forth into any situation. And when she did that, and with someone sitting in front of her who was open to receive, that light of the higher self would come down and radiate out through her heart, and you would feel it. And children would come up to her in the store that she didn't know and just want to be with her, throw their arms around her. Wherever she went, she would bring light and joy to people. Even driving through Reno, they stopped at a casino, and Pearl walked through, and she would be guided where to go, and she'd stand next to a lady and put her hand on her shoulder, and the woman would win the jackpot. I mean, this happened a couple of times, and then she'd just turn and leave, you know. And the woman one time said, "What did you do?" You know, the woman had been losing money all day, and then Pearl went up, stood next to her, put her hand on her, and immediately hit the jackpot. It's just who she was, and she could teach other people how to do that. You become a catalyst once you're in touch with that God presence in the center of your being. You become a catalyst for good wherever you go and wherever your attention is. Well, I'm eternally grateful to Pearl, because in all my years on the path, probably close to 50 now, 45, I've never met another teacher like that. There are very great teachers, but they're not accessible. With Pearl, you could sit down one-on-one and you would feel the presence of God. That people came out of spending time with her, whether it's 10 minutes or 2 hours, and they would be radiant. And you would see people lining the road going down from her house, lying down on people's lawns, and you didn't need to ask. They would say, "Oh, I just saw Pearl." And no more explanation was necessary. And in all my travels in India and Tibet, I met no one else like that. Some, I think, had that ability, but they kept it to themselves. So I'm eternally grateful for that, and Pearl has really asked me to continue those teachings to the extent that I'm able, which is what I've been trying to do. But it's a very great gift, and I'm eternally grateful to Pearl and to those Ascended Masters who worked through her, and the great blessing that they are here to give to humanity.
Show me how you do that trick, the one that makes me scream. He said, the one that makes me laugh. He said, and threw his arms around my neck. Show me how you do it, and I promise that I'll run away with you. I'll run away.